Continuing our reading in The World and Thorinn by Damon Knight. Today is Chapter 5, Section 1. How Thorinn entered a treasure cave and found a magic box that could speak, albeit foolishly. 2957 A.D. In this year the wise men forewist that it would 50 year be past our sun would burn so bright that it would roast us all like meat on a furnace, and would be our bane. Then spoke some and said, Making we a char of this earth, so shall we flee our sun's fire and seek another star. Yet others answered, So ye shall lease our air, for it would freeze. But what that would worken a great roof over the world, and of which matted working we switch a roof, that of its own weight it shall fall. Then started one that said, Working we a bladder fulfilled of air, so shall the roof be kept air, with air kept up the roof. So they began and working for 20 years in this work. Water stung Thorinn's eyes, his nose. The roaring blackness whirled around him. He struggled against it, but his body was like a stone. Water surged over his face again, half strangled. He struck out and found the soft edges of the pod under his hands. His eyes were open, but he could see nothing. The pod tilted, shuddered. The roaring of the water was beneath him. He floundered, trying to turn over. The pod tilted, and he felt the black water sucking at his legs. He strained to pull himself against the pod. It was canted, half out of the water. The water roared black beneath it, trying to drag him down. He struck out with his feet, touched slippery stone, then lost it. It seemed to him that the pod was jammed against some crevice down which the water was pouring. He groped again, found footing once more, but the pod swung, and he was kicking in the water again. He worked his grasp higher on the pod, fighting the tug of the water. He was shaking with cold. Here the pod narrowed. He was able to get one arm under it, grasp it from the opposite side. Hanging underneath in this way, he put his foot back, touched bottom, and braced himself precariously. The current streamed against the back of his legs. He turned clumsily, one hand on the pod. The pod began to swing, letting it go. He leaped. The water swept his legs out from under him, and he was down, pawing the slippery stone underneath. He fell, was swept back, struggled up, fell again. Something smote him on the cheek, making his head ring. He grabbed, found himself clinging to a massive stone half out of the water. He dragged himself across it, braced himself on the far side. Only then could he pause to cough the water out of his throat. The blackness was solid and velvety. The rushing roar of the water never stopped. He began to remember now and understood that the pod had carried him down the cataract. He was safe for the moment and not drowning, and that was all he cared about. After a time, he rose himself enough to make sure that he was still with his sword and wallet, and then to fumble in the wallet for his light box. He uncapped the box, and a pale beam sprang out. In its light, he saw the cold water silvery about him. Only 2 ells off, the pod slowly turned in a whirlpool. All his struggle had been to come that little way. The ragged ceiling was close overhead. Below, the water was everywhere. He could see no end to it. A few irregular blocks of stone rose above the water, or could be seen dimly shining beneath it. They looked as if they had fallen from a broken ceiling. Moving from one stone to the next, supporting himself with one hand and holding the light box with the other, he put the whirlpool behind him. He saw another in the distance and avoided it. Then he noticed that the water was growing shallower. The stone under his feet was broken and tilted this way and that. It rose until he was wading in sluggish water, no more than ankle deep. Ahead, he saw a line of brightness where the water curled over the edge of a hole. As he approached, he felt a cool breath. He looked down over the lip. Below, he saw broken stone. jeweled with the rebounding slow droplets of the water that fell on it. Lying full length in the water, he put his head and one arm down, turning the light box this way and that. He could see nothing but darkness beyond the ragged curtains of the water. He could not tell where the falling water ran away. The slabs between were almost dry. He stood, hesitated a moment, then stepped off, pointing the light box down as he fell. He landed on a tilted slab, lost his footing, and sat down hard, but without taking any hurt. Now the roar of the water was muted overhead, and he could hear the gurgle of lesser streams running away somewhere below. The falling curtains of water were all around him, ghostly silver, prickled with jewels of floating droplets. Drifting water points burst on his skin with tiny cool kisses. There were gaps in the falling curtains, torn by the irregular stone above. He put his hand through the widest of these openings, saw other broken slabs, other curtains of water beyond. Following the cool air, he made his way among the gray and silver curtains that hung everywhere from the ceiling. Rivulets ran toward him, underfoot, among the slabs of stone, and he knew by this that the floor was slanted upward. At length, the falling curtains of water grew less numerous, and the sound diminished to a mournful pattering behind him. Ahead, the cavern broke into a tortured complexity of shapes, in which he found a narrow passage leading upward. He paused to tip out the water from his wallet, and to dry his hair as well as he could with his hands. Then he followed the passage. It coiled away ahead of him, always upward, always round, irregular, dry, and empty in the glow of his light box. And that's the end of section 1.